Hello everyone, I'm Jordana Van of Ravenlight Holistic Healing, and today I will be answering a few of the questions that you guys ask me all the time, which are, can I have more than one totem? If so, how many can I have, and why is that? I'm also going to be briefly addressing confusion over having totems that seem to really conflict with each other. So first, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, let's talk about the concept of a totem for a moment. At its heart, a totem is a creature, whether it's an animal, an insect, a bird, or a plant, that symbolically represents a part of who we are. We resonate with it because in some way we identify with it. The whole creature itself, or simply some very significant features of it, either aligns with who we see ourselves as already or who we want to be. It may also represent parts of ourselves that perhaps we secretly love, but we are pretty darn sure that we don't feel we can ever be loved for, because we never have been loved for them, and perhaps have even been badly rejected for them in the past. And guys, when you really learn to heal the wounds that made you think this way and learn to fully love yourselves regardless of your personal histories, you'll be loved for the whole you. Learning this exact thing is part of the journey. And you can trust me on this because I have had to walk that path myself. Now, sometimes I also hear people use the term shadow totem, and I feel that this is appropriate. This would be when a creature scares the heck out of us, and this is because it represents parts of ourselves that feel impossible to accept, and we have rejected outright because we've been taught to believe that they're bad, or we're not seeing ourselves clearly. Many people experience their totem creatures in a very deep spiritual way, classic spirituality, as animals that, or as spirits that show up to assist them in some way, or in visions, or they simply feel the most profound kinship with them. Some people just know that an animal really means something to them, though they may have no idea why. Sometimes it's one way with one totem, a different way with another. But you don't need to have that deep spiritual experience to see them in a vision or have a crazy encounter with them in the wild or work with them personally for them to be a totem and to be significant for you. You may simply just really, really like them and perhaps have a bazillion figurines of them all over your house, or doodle them endlessly in the margins of your notebooks, or have a tattoo of them. So before we get to the details, for those of you who just came here looking for the short, quick answer to the can I have more than one totem question, yes, you can. And in my experience, before you leave this particular incarnation, you will have at least several. As for the exact number, there isn't one. It varies from person to person. So for the rest of you who'd like to understand exactly why this is, and to hear more about how you know how many you have, let's first talk about the biggest reason for all the confusion, which is that no one culture or belief system owns the notion of a totem. Think about the ancient Egyptians, who worshipped gods and goddesses with different animal associations. In the Celtic Druidic tradition, each animal is seen as being connected to specific inner knowledge and healing. Totems were an important part of the belief system and culture of many of the pre-Christian Norse and Germanic peoples. Sometimes these totems were personal, other times they were linked to specific groups of warriors. Many of their gods also had their own totemic associations, such as the infamous Odin with his ravens. And then there are the Native American peoples who have their own beliefs about totems, and from whom the modern English word totem actually comes. Now, if you're curious, the word comes from the Ojibwa people, and I am not going to do their lovely language the indignity of attempting to pronounce the original word. The Aztec and Toltec people also have their own notion of totems, as does each Asian culture, as do the unique African tribes and the Aboriginal Australians, and so on and so on. Some cultures also have family totems that they pass on. You frequently find this in African cultures, where the totem is directly linked to your bloodline. The reason that this is so important to understand is that ideas about spiritual concepts, such as how many totems a person can have, are largely based in cultural definitions, such as the most frequently cited Native American totem tradition, in which certain tribes believe that you have 9 totems based on positions on the medicine wheel, and that these animals are inherently linked to the day of your birth. This is one of the reasons why you guys so often ask me what your 9 totems are. The thing is, what we're really talking about in this case is a form of astrology, not the kind of symbolic, totemic, emotional associations that you guys have been taught to expect. Where did this expectation come from? Well, there are other parts of Native American history or lore in which someone does have what could be described as a totemic relationship with an animal. And those may have nothing to do with the person's specific birthday. Other cultures' lore and history also speaks to having a very deep connection with an animal or animal spirit, with many of these accounts including actual shape-shifting. And then there are all the fantasy novels we read, of which I read obsessively, so there's no judgment on my end, and comic books and video games and movies and TV shows and on and on. And let's not forget all of the "this is your totem" internet quizzes. In these situations, the animal is represented as feeling like a part of us somehow, and it has an emotional significance. Well, not so much the internet quizzes. In those cases, you guys are usually saying to me, "This quiz told me this thing was my totem, and it sort of makes sense, but I feel nothing, and now I'm more confused than ever." Anyway, the emotional depth and warm fuzzies may happen with one of the animals on your medicine wheel, but it's not a foregone conclusion. For example, I once met the most incredible shaman in a little shop in Arizona, and she did my horoscope for me according to the way that her native tribe does them. The animals didn't really resonate with me personally, but the way she presented that information as an astrological reading, what they symbolized in that sense and in those particular positions on my medicine wheel, that worked. So with all of this conflicting info, where does my answer to the aforementioned questions come from? When we get into the nitty-gritty in a second, I will be speaking from my own personal spiritual experiences as a person walking this path with the rest of you, from what I've observed in friends and family, from years researching and studying the spiritual links between people and animals in different cultures from all over the world, and most especially from the better part of a decade working with clients in this exact arena day in and day out. If you're looking for an answer that honors your unique heritage, and I would really encourage you to do so if you feel particularly close to your roots, just to see if it speaks to you, then there are many wonderful spiritual practitioners who can help you understand your culture's unique spiritual beliefs and practices, and they're just a Google search away. So, back to the original question, can we have more than one totem? Yes. In fact, you'll eventually have more than one, probably at least a handful more, maybe even more than a handful. I've never worked with someone who has more than 12, at least not that I can recall off the top of my head at the moment, but that doesn't preclude the possibility. And you don't usually get to know them all at once. And this is really for the sake of your sanity, guys. So if you're thinking, but I only know one of them, don't panic. They'll show up in the way and time that is best for you, and it is not on you to discover them. If you're meant to know at that time, you will. You'll stumble across the right resource that gives you a clue, or the animal itself will make itself known to you in some way. If you're not meant to know, it's not going to matter how hard you try. You aren't going to figure it out, and you're just going to drive yourself crazy. So let's talk about the whys here. Remember that animal totems aren't just symbols for qualities that we already possess and that we like about ourselves, but that we are aware that we possess and don't think we can ever be loved for. They are also linked to qualities within ourselves that we are not even yet aware that we have. The role of our totems is to help us move through the challenges we face in developing the kind of self-acceptance for those pieces of ourselves that lead to being loved wholly and completely for who we are, and to allowing the universe to support us for being who we are and not who we think we need to be. This is probably going to be a little difficult for the youngest among you to accept, so bear with me. But we change a lot during our lives. The person you are at 16 or 18 or 21 is very different from the person you're going to be at 28 if you're learning and growing as intended. And the person you are at 38 is going to be different from the 28-year-old, as will the 40-year-old and the 7-year-old, the 70-year-old, and the person who's still rocking it at 120. There will be soul quakes throughout your life that cause you to crack open and grow and change in ways you can't even fathom right now. This is not to say that you haven't experienced a hell of a life so far. My own life was pretty darn messy by the time I was 18. But certain age-related parameters still tend to be in play here. When we experience life, We inherently have a way we each want to react to what it brings to us, whether that's pleasure or pain. But prior to gaining our freedom from our family of origin or our legal guardians, or at the very least the right to leave if we choose, the way we react to stuff is curtailed by the programming we receive from our guardians or from our societies. We force down our inherent desires, and we move in the ways we've been told to move, and we try to make ourselves feel the way we've been told we're supposed to feel by our family or our community or our faith or our government or whatever. Or we go the other way, and we rebel like crazy. But this rebellion is usually motivated by internal factors we don't yet understand. And so it doesn't particularly help us either. And we lose our freedom to an even greater degree, winding up punished or medicated into submission or out on the streets. So the challenge for everyone comes when we reach our majority, gain our freedom to control our own lives, and we realize with each new thing we experience that we don't want to react and to behave in the ways that we've been taught, but in these bizarre, inherent, inexplicable ways that tend to go against the grain of our upbringing. That we want things we were told we weren't supposed to have, or that we want to believe things that we were told we shouldn't believe, that we want to do something else, be someone different, and that we are the only ones responsible for what occurs next. This is where life happens, guys. This is where we discover that we're not who we thought we had to be, and we're called to reach deep within ourselves for the courage and fortitude to change. It's pure cataclysmic magic. And while it sometimes is literally the hardest thing we ever do, if we can hang in there and keep tuning into what our soul wants, we grow and we change, and we leave a part of the person we thought was us behind. Each one of these life-altering experiences is likely to have its own totem, or totems, depending on how complicated it is, to go with it. Now, I'm not talking about repetitious experiences, like heartbreak, for example. Every time you have your heart broken, the same totem is likely there waiting to be accessed. But, I mean, there may be one totem for romantic love, another for money, another for finding your personal version of spirituality, another for how to be your best self as a parent, etc. This is also why sometimes you will have been aware of a totem for a really long time, but not quite have been certain what to do with it. The lessons just haven't come up yet. For example, I have always known from my first conscious memory that raven and red-tailed hawk were totems for me. Even before I knew what totems were, I knew this. But they didn't really develop any significance in my life until I went through some really catastrophic losses and emotional wounds that triggered PTSD and physical illnesses it would take me years upon years to understand, process, and finally heal, during which I relied on the wisdom of raven and hawk a lot. Snake, on the other hand, practically fell out of the sky. I had had no idea snake was one of my totems until he told me he was. And then suddenly a lot of the experiences I had been having made sense. By the way, to speak to the concept of our totems being tied to particular challenges. Many of these challenges don't feel that great. They are mentally, emotionally, or physically painful. But as Eckhart Tolle so succinctly puts it, suffering is necessary until you understand that it is unnecessary. I did not enjoy suffering by any means. But if I hadn't been in a state of suffering for so long, I would never have stopped what I was doing long enough to look at what was wrong. Being uncomfortable forces change because we don't want to be uncomfortable anymore. It's a motivator like no other. So until we learn to slow down, listen to our emotions and what they are telling us about how we are experiencing our life, and then commit to honoring them in a way that leads to change, we tend to suffer. Once we learn how much the universe actually loves us and that change brings joy, we don't need that wallop to make us stop. We pay attention when we are uncomfortable, and we ask what needs to change. This is when we learn to grow and change with relative joy and ease. So life doesn't have to be all suffering. Change just seems to start that way. Also, let's talk a little astrology again, shall we? I use Western astrology because it's what I was raised with, and because while I have studied a lot of other systems, this is the one that just makes the most analytical and intuitive sense to me. Now, anyone who thinks astrology is bogus has never actually studied astrology. It is not just, oh, you're an Aries, so this is who you are. No. It is, well, your sun sign is Aries, but your rising sign is Capricorn, and you've got an 8th house moon in Libra, and your Neptune squares your Venus in this or that house. It's complicated. The sign each planet was in when you were born, the house each planet was in when you were born, and then the specific angles each of those planets made to each other within a certain number of degrees at your exact time of birth and latitude and longitude of birth all means something. An actual astrologer knows how to interpret each of these placements and develop an accurate picture of who you are, because each of these placements speaks to a particular area of our functioning and our histories and the challenges we're likely to face. You guys want to know how I can tell you intimate, uber-specific details about who you are that you have never shared with another human being the first time we talk? A lot of it's pure intuition, but it's also equally because I've been using astrology since my mother started teaching it to me as a young child, and because I combine it with numerology, which adds a whole nother layer of understanding. And then, of course, there are the unique things that your animals want to share with you. Anyway, if you have an understanding of astrology, you can see that we are super duper freaking complicated creatures, far more so than most of us realize, and that we often have drives within us that conflict. One part of us wants one thing, one part of us wants another, and we can't seem to understand why we are always sabotaging ourselves. For example, I need a freaking ton of alone time. I mean a ton. And I do not like being in crowds. They overwhelm me. But I also love talking with my clients. I adore public speaking when I'm in front of the crowd, not in it. And I find enormous joy in entertaining people. Because I didn't actually understand why I wanted what I did when I wanted it, I would often try to force myself to be social when I wanted to withdraw, or to be quiet when I wanted to be social, and I was unhappy a lot. Until we learn to understand what part of us wants what and why, we tend to always believe that we are supposed to be one way or another, and to try to force ourselves to behave in ways that run contrary to our true needs. This is why your totem animals sometimes seem so at odds at each other, as in the case of those of you who seem to have an equal number of predator and prey totems, or sky and sea animals, and why it's so important to treat every animal that interests you as though it may have something important to teach you, even if it conflicts with something you already think you know about yourself, or a quality within yourself that you really like and fear having compromised. Those animals are representing the parts of yourself that often come into conflict, such as a drive for isolation, just as strong as a drive that craves being in the spotlight. In my case, the part of me that enjoys chatting with and entertaining others is linked to the part of me that really resonates with Raven, who's a storyteller, among many other things. The part of me that just wants everybody to go the heck away so I can sit in peace and quiet is linked to Bear, who likes his solitude. Each animal helped me understand why I want what I do when I want it, and honor that. So I no longer push myself around, but just let myself flow as needed, and everything works. If I hadn't been able to embrace them equally, I might have eternally felt at odds with myself and unhappy as a result. So how many totems can you have? There isn't a specific number, as some of us are more complicated than others and may therefore experience more growth and development in this lifetime and require guidance from different quarters. Also, it is neither better nor worse to have fewer or more totems. Just because you aren't growing in 10 different areas doesn't mean you aren't doing a ton of freaking work. The person who only has to develop 3 or 4 major areas of their being is not doing anything wrong or inferior compared to the person who came here to work on 9 of them. You can't define a spiritual journey in those terms. They just are what they are, and each is special in its own way. So if there are no hard and fast rules here, how do you know if you're getting it right? Because there's actually no way to get it wrong. We can only move at the speed of the knowledge and wisdom that we possess at the time. If you aren't seeing something important, it's because you can't at that time. And being able to see it in hindsight and why you missed it in the first place is part of what you were intended to learn. And by the way, the experience of this learning was something you really wanted to have before you were deciding, before you incarnated, how you wanted this life to look and feel. So wherever you are, you are. And the only thing you can do is be as bravely open and willing to grow and change and learn as you can. That is it. Whatever happens next is part of the divine plan and not something you can consciously control in the here and now. So when you worry you're missing something or getting it wrong, ask yourself, am I as open as I can be to growing and changing, even if it's scary. If you're not, well, you can see where your work is right now. If you are, you're right where you're supposed to be. Hope that this has given you guys some clarity, or at least some peace of mind. And if you have questions about your particular totems, you are welcome to schedule a session with me. I work with people all over the world to help them understand the unique messages of their animal totems and spirit guides, and also to help with physical and emotional healing, dream interpretation, figuring out what you're here to do with yourself, and about a billion other things. And I would love to work with you as well. This is what I do for a living, and it's awesome. So if you're interested in working with me, you can visit my website, which is www.ravenlightholistichealing.com. It'll tell you exactly what I do, what to expect, what I charge, how to book a session with me, and all that good stuff. And please be sure to check out my FAQ page before emailing me with questions, because the answer may already be at your fingertips. You can also follow me in my work on Facebook and Instagram at Ravenlight Holistic Healing. Be sure to look for Ravenlight Holistic Healing and not Jordana Van, as I do not accept friend requests on my personal page. Have a gorgeous day, my darlings. Cheers.